In the summer of 1942, the Allied position in North Africa faced a critical test. British and Commonwealth forces had been driven eastward across Libya after a series of defeats, most notably the fall of Tobruk in June. The loss of the port had shocked British leadership and severely damaged morale throughout the Middle East Command. Axis forces under General Erwin Rommel appeared poised to advance into Egypt, threatening the Suez Canal, a strategic lifeline for the British Empire. At this stage of the campaign, the outcome of the Desert War remained uncertain, and the British Army was struggling to regain operational stability. General Claude Auchinleck held dual responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief Middle East and Commander of the British Eighth Army. In early July 1942, Auchinleck halted Rommel's advance at the First Battle of El Alamein, establishing a defensive position anchored between the Mediterranean Sea and the Qatar Depression. This terrain prevented wide flanking maneuvers and offered a natural defensive barrier. Although Auchinleck's stand prevented an immediate Axis breakthrough, political leaders in London viewed the situation as unsatisfactory. The British government wanted decisive action, not continued defensive fighting. In August 1942, Prime Minister Winston Churchill traveled to Cairo to assess the situation personally. Dissatisfied with the pace and direction of operations, Churchill decided to reorganize the command structure. Auchinleck was removed from his role as Commander-in-Chief and replaced by General Sir Harold Alexander. Command of the Eighth Army was given to General William Gott. Before Gott could assume command, however, his aircraft was shot down by German fighters while returning to Cairo, and he was killed. This sudden loss forced Churchill to reconsider his choice. On the recommendation of Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Churchill appointed Lieutenant-General Bernard Montgomery to command the Eighth Army. Montgomery had recently been selected to command the British First Army for Operation Torch, the planned Allied landings in French North Africa, but the crisis in Egypt took priority. Montgomery arrived to take command in mid-August 1942, inheriting an army that had experienced repeated withdrawals and suffered from low confidence and inconsistent leadership. Montgomery's first priority was to stabilize the Eighth Army psychologically and organizationally. One of his earliest actions was to eliminate all contingency plans for retreat from the El Alamein position. He made it clear to senior officers that there would be no further withdrawals. This directive was intended to remove ambiguity from operational planning and to reinforce the idea that El Alamein was to be held under all circumstances. While later accounts often emphasized the dramatic nature of this decision, its practical purpose was to impose clarity and discipline at all levels of command. In reorganizing the Eighth Army, Montgomery adopted a structure that differed significantly from German practice. He grouped all armored divisions under the 10th Corps and all infantry divisions under the 30th Corps, centralizing coordination at Army headquarters. German Panzer Corps typically combined armor, infantry, and artillery within a single formation, allowing greater flexibility at lower levels. Montgomery's approach emphasized control and predictability over flexibility. Although historians later criticized this structure for reinforcing separation between infantry and armor, Montgomery believed it would reduce confusion and ensure that operations followed a unified plan. At the same time, Montgomery began strengthening the El Alamein defensive line, which stretched approximately 30 miles. This process took several weeks and involved reinforcing key positions, expanding minefields, and improving artillery coverage. Montgomery requested additional divisions, including the 51st Highland Division and the 44th Home Counties Division, which were arriving in Egypt and had initially been intended for the defense of the Nile Delta. He also relocated his headquarters to Burg Al Arab, closer to Royal Air Force command facilities, to improve coordination between air and ground operations. Montgomery anticipated that Rommel would attempt a flanking attack against the southern sector of the British line, targeting the high ground at Alamein el Halfa. These heights dominated the approaches behind the 8th Army's positions and were critical to maintaining the integrity of the defensive line. Montgomery ordered the area reinforced in advance, integrating minefields, anti-tank guns, artillery, and air support into a coordinated defensive system. Rommel launched his attack at the end of August 1942 during the Battle of Alamein. Halfa, German, and Italian armored formations attempted to bypass British defenses and seize the high ground. The attack encountered heavy resistance almost immediately. Axis units were slowed by extensive minefields, subjected to sustained artillery fire, and attacked repeatedly by Allied aircraft. Fuel shortages further limited Axis mobility. After several days of fighting, Rommel was forced to withdraw to avoid the risk of encirclement. The failure at Alamein Halfa marked a significant moment in the Desert Campaign. It was one of the few times Rommel's offensive initiative had been decisively checked. Despite this success, Montgomery declined to launch an immediate counterattack against the withdrawing Axis forces. This decision drew criticism from some commanders and political leaders who believed an opportunity had been missed. Montgomery argued that his forces were not yet fully prepared for a decisive offensive and that a premature pursuit could expose the Eighth Army to unnecessary risk. As September progressed, political pressure increased. Churchill grew increasingly impatient, concerned that momentum was being lost. Other senior officials questioned whether Montgomery's caution was justified. Tobruk continued to defend Montgomery's approach, emphasizing that preparation and logistical readiness were essential if a major offensive was to succeed. Brooke's support proved decisive in allowing Montgomery to continue building up his forces. During this period, Montgomery focused on improving training, discipline, and coordination. Units were trained extensively in night operations, minefield clearance, and infantry armor cooperation, areas that had previously caused difficulties. Montgomery conducted frequent visits to front-line units, issued clear operational guidance, and emphasized consistency in command. Senior visitors, including Brooke and Alexander, noted a marked improvement in morale and organization within weeks of Montgomery assuming command. By mid-October 1942, the Eighth Army was ready to launch a major offensive. It consisted of more than 230,000 men and was supported by substantial artillery, air power, and armored forces, including large numbers of American-built Sherman tanks and self-propelled guns. Supply lines were secure, ammunition stocks were ample, and air superiority had been established over the battlefield. The Second Battle of El Alamein began on the night of the 23rd of October 1942 with a massive artillery bombardment along the Axis front. Montgomery's plan emphasized attrition rather than rapid maneuver. The initial objective was to create breaches through the Axis minefields and gradually wear down enemy forces through sustained pressure. Infantry advances were supported by coordinated artillery fire and close air support, while armored units were held back to exploit opportunities once defenses weakened. Progress during the early days of the battle was slow and costly. Axis forces, though outnumbered, defended their positions effectively using minefields, anti-tank guns, and well-coordinated counterattacks. Rommel, who had returned to command despite ill health, recognized that the British offensive differed from previous attempts. Montgomery maintained constant pressure along a narrow front rather than seeking wide flanking movements. As the battle continued, logistical realities increasingly favored the Allies. Axis fuel shortages restricted armored movement, and Allied air attacks disrupted supply routes from Libya. The Royal Air Force maintained continuous pressure on Axis transport columns, ports, and rear areas. British losses could be replaced, while Axis losses could not. The disparity in resources became more pronounced with each passing day. In late October, Montgomery shifted the focus of the offensive to the northern sector, where Axis defenses were held largely by Italian units supported by German formations. This phase, later known as Operation Supercharge, aimed to draw Axis armored reserves into battle and destroy them through concentrated artillery fire and numerical superiority. British and Commonwealth forces advanced steadily, absorbing counterattacks while continuing to press forward. Rommel committed his remaining armored reserves in an effort to halt the breakthrough. These counterattacks failed to regain the initiative and resulted in further losses. On the 2nd of November 1942, Rommel requested permission to withdraw. Adolf Hitler initially ordered the position to be held, but the deteriorating situation forced Rommel to begin a fighting retreat to prevent the destruction of his army. Axis forces withdrew westward, abandoning equipment and suffering additional losses during Allied air attacks. Montgomery ordered a cautious pursuit, while some later critics argued that a faster advance could have destroyed the Axis army entirely. Montgomery prioritized maintaining cohesion, secure supply lines, and operational control. The Eighth Army advanced steadily across Libya, reoccupying Tobruk and Benghazi with limited resistance as Axis forces continued their withdrawal. The strategic situation changed further, with the Allied landings in Morocco and Algeria under Operation Torch in November 1942. Axis forces in North Africa now faced pressure from both east and west. Rommel withdrew toward Tunisia, where German command attempted to establish a defensive line supported by reinforcements arriving from Europe. Unlike in Libya, Axis forces in Tunisia benefited from shorter supply lines and more restrictive terrain. As the Eighth Army advanced into Tunisia in early 1943, desert warfare gave way to more constrained operations. Montgomery adapted his approach, emphasizing coordinated infantry and armored advances supported by artillery rather than wide maneuver. Progress slowed, but Allied pressure continued to build. Coordination between British and American forces initially proved challenging due to differences in experience and doctrine, but cooperation improved as the campaign progressed. By April 1943, Axis forces in Tunisia were under sustained attack from multiple directions. Allied air forces dominated the battlefield, disrupting Axis movement and supply. German attempts to stabilize the front failed as shortages of manpower and equipment became critical. In May 1943, Axis resistance collapsed. More than 250,000 German and Italian troops surrendered, ending the North African campaign. The defeat of Axis forces in North Africa had major strategic consequences. It eliminated the threat to Egypt and the Middle East, secured Allied control of the southern Mediterranean, and opened the way for operations against Sicily and mainland Italy. For the British Army, the campaign marked a transition from a period of setbacks to sustained offensive operations. Montgomery emerged from the campaign with his reputation firmly established. His emphasis on preparation, logistics, and unified command delivered consistent results, even if his methods remained controversial. The North African campaign demonstrated that a methodical approach, supported by superior resources and coordination, could defeat an experienced and capable opponent. The lessons learned at El Alamein and in Tunisia would shape Allied operations for the remainder of the war.